Hey everybody, welcome back. David Eon here with yet another Mego list. I'm doing another one by request actually. And to be honest, I'm having fun doing these, having fun sharing this with the people that are into the new Mego since Mego is back. Just speculating on things that Mego could do if they can get the licenses for it. And you know that's always up in the air. Licensing isn't always easy, because you not only have to contract with whoever it is that owns the rights to the show or the film, but also with the likenesses of the individuals. There's a lot to consider. But today we're going to do 80s television shows. The last one that I just did was 80s films. Got a little carried away with it because it's hard to just do 10. There were so many great films in the 80s. And of course, you know, if you like what's on the list, give it a thumbs up. If you think there's something else that you would like to see on the list, just tell us about it in the comment section down below, because there's a lot to consider. There was a lot of great 80s shows, but I picked 10, maybe an extra one, but picked out a few that I think would be great as Mego figures. I tried not to pick anything too obvious like Star Trek The Next Generation, because everybody's going to say Star Trek The Next Generation, right? So I'm trying to pick a few that maybe some people would consider, and maybe a few that some people might not have thought of. So let's go ahead. In no particular order. Number 1, Miami Vice aired September 16th, 1984, starring Don Johnson as Sonny Crockett and Philip Michael Thomas as Ricardo Tubbs. It's hard to forget this show. The way that it looked, the music, I mean, the soundtrack from that show is the epitome of 80s music. The feel of the show, it was a brilliant program for its time. It was way ahead of itself, and they spent a fortune. NBC spent a lot of money keeping that show running to keep it looking the way that it did until they just couldn't afford it anymore. But absolutely, Miami Vice, I would love to see that done in figures. Number 2, Highway to Heaven. One of my favorite 80s shows. I love this show. I'm rewatching it right now, actually, and I love it just as much now. I really always enjoyed this show. Aired September 19th, 1984, starring Michael Landon as Jonathan Smith and Victor French as Mark Gordon, who, of course, worked together on Little House on the Prairie. Michael Landon's been in television for a long time before he passed away. Between Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven and his other projects. I mean, more than 3 decades in television. But I always loved this show. I would love to see figures. Something like that has never been done with this show. Number 3, Knight Rider. September 26, 1982, starring David Hasselhoff as Michael Long. Not Michael Knight. Michael Long, who was a police officer shot and left for dead, but then rescued by Wilton Knight, given a new face and identity, and paired up with KIT, which stands for Knight Industries 2000. So a wealthy millionaire with an expensive car basically kidnaps a dying police officer, gives him a facelift and a new identity, and turns him into a secret agent. Sounds like a comic book, but that is classic 80s, and every attempt to redo Knight Rider has failed. They always look terrible. It's no good without David Hasselhoff. Number 4, can't avoid this one even though it's probably kind of obvious. The ATeam, come on! January 23rd, 1983, with Dirk Benedict as Templeton Peck, and of course Dirk Benedict was Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica, and there is an Easter egg to Battlestar Galactica in the opening credits of the ATeam, and that's why that's there as a nod to Dirk Benedict. Mr. T is B.A. Baracus, and Mr. T just personified the 80s. If you picked 5 people to represent the 80s, Mr. T's got to be on that list. Dwight Schultz is Howling Mad Murdoch, who went on to be on Star Trek The Next Generation, actually, didn't he? And George Peppard is John Hannibal Smith. Man, I loved this show. And of course, it had action figure lines in the 80s, but not much has been done since except for like Funko Pops. Number 5, Night Court. Who didn't love this show? January 4th, 1984, with Harry Anderson as Harry Stone, Richard Mall as Bull Shannon, and funny enough, you know, Richard Mall, he got the part because he was bald when he showed up for the audition. He had just starred in this really crappy, or co-starred rather, in this really crappy B film where he had to shave his head. And so he showed up for the audition bald, and they said, "Hey, that works. Just hire him." John Larroquette as Dan Fielding, who won like 4 Emmys for that show as a Best Supporting Cast Member. And Selma Diamond as Selma Hacker, who of course was Bull's partner on the show. And I know he had 3 partners because they kept dying, but the first one, Selma Hacker, was always my favorite. And of course, there was Charles Robinson as Mac Robinson, who was always a fun cast member on that show. Number 6, Hunter, September 18th, 1984. You noticing a pattern with these dates? A lot of them are 84. Fred Dryer is Rick Hunter, who was a football player. Did you know that? Football player for the Giants and the Rams back in the day. I think he's a radio host now. And Stephanie Kramer as Dee Dee McCall. Hunter is a classic 80s show, showing a sort of an alternative detective show, showing detectives that weren't kind of flashy and, the opposite sort of Miami Vice. But it was a great show. Number 7, Magnum P.I., December 11th, 1980, with Tom Selleck as Thomas Magnum and Roger Mosley as Theodore Calvin, otherwise known as TC, and John Hillerman as Higgins. And I think Higgins should come with his Dobermans. Remember, he always had the 2 Dobermans sitting in front of his desk? I think they should package him with the 2 dogs. That would be cool. Number 8, Beauty and the Beast. Remember this show? September 5th, 1987, starring who else? Ron Perlman as Vincent. Ron Perlman's been wearing makeup a lot longer than Hellboy. And then Linda Hamilton as Catherine Chandler, even though I hated her character. She always led on like she loved Vincent, and she always, at the end of every show almost, they looked like they were going to kiss, and then she'd turn away from him. And I'm like, you bitch. I used to get so mad at her. It's like, you either like this guy or you don't. If you don't like him, tell him to go away. I know, I'm awful. Number 9, Red Dwarf. Red Dwarf, British television, February 15th, 1988, with Craig Charles as Dave Lister, Chris Berry as Arnold Rimmer, and Danny John Jules as the Cat. And Robert Llewellyn as the android. This show is hilarious. I used to love this show. And it really has never ended because they keep going back and making like a short season for this show because the fans have loved it so much. That really says something when you can make something last that long. Number 10, Seinfeld, who barely makes it on the list because that came out July 5th, 1989. So it's right at the tail end of the 80s, right under the wire for an 80s TV show. Jerry Seinfeld as himself, I guess so that he wouldn't forget his name. Michael Richards as Cosmo Kramer, who basically every part he's ever had, he's been Kramer. If you ever saw the movie UHF with Weird Al Yankovic, Kramer. Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Elaine Bennis, and Jason Alexander as George Constanza. He had Wayne Knight as Newman, and on and on and on. There were so many characters to work with there. His father, George's father and mother, who probably will be peg warmers and sit there for 2 years like Tootie, but there's a lot of potential for characters with Seinfeld, and it is classic. It did start with the 80s, though, and that's why it's on the list, although technically it's probably viewed more as a 90s show. And you know what? I'll give you one more. Why not? MacGyver. Come on, nothing says 80s like MacGyver. September 29th, 1985. Richard Dean Anderson is Angus MacGyver. I bet you didn't know his name was Angus, did you? You didn't know that. Angus MacGyver. And you know what would be a cool accessory? If they put like a little fake Swiss Army knife, like a little kid's plastic Swiss Army knife, like the kind they used to sell, in the package with them. And for an honorable mention, I'm just going to throw these out there. 2 other big 80s shows that could make a list like this, but they never will. Roseanne and The Cosby Show. And the reason why no one would touch them under normal circumstances is because of the controversy surrounding the main characters from those shows now. We all know what happened to Cosby, and we know that the trouble that Roseanne Barr's gotten herself in as well. So people wouldn't touch it. But That's unfortunate because regardless of what they may have said or what they may have done or what they may have been accused of, you can't deny they left a big footprint. Especially Bill Cosby left a massive footprint in the 70s and 80s. I mean, think about it. The Electric Company, the Fat Albert Show, one of the best cartoons from that time period. The Cosby Show itself, and a lot of other projects he was involved in. I Spy, which was kind of groundbreaking for its time. I mean, come on. There's too much to ignore, but we've been asked to ignore it, haven't we? And that's unfortunate. But that's my list. That's my short list, because there's plenty of other 80s shows that could absolutely go on a list like this. If you like the list, like I said, please do give it a thumbs up. Check out some of the other Mego What If videos that I've done if you haven't seen them. If you have some suggestions, if you have other 80s shows that you would like to see done, put it in the comment section down below. I'd love to see it. Share the video if you can. Subscribe if you're new. Check out some of the other videos. I do a lot more than just lists. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.